Major Elijah Eli Winters had always been a man of few words and strong actions. At 82, his tall frame had thinned, and his gait had slowed, but there was a presence about him that never faded, quiet steadiness carved from decades of service and loss. The Silver Star medal he kept tucked in a box at home wasn't something he spoke about. Most people in his small town of Fairbridge didn't even know he had served in 2 wars. To them, he was the kind old man who volunteered at the local library, helped fix veterans' headstones on Memorial Day, and taught kids how to fish. But to Naomi Winters, he was the man who raised her when no one else would. Naomi had been 8 years old when her parents died in a car accident. Eli, already retired and living alone, had taken her in without hesitation. He never tried to replace her father, his own son, but he filled the role with quiet grace, teaching her discipline, compassion, and how to live with honor. Now 30 and a dedicated middle school history teacher, Naomi remained fiercely close to her grandfather. She'd seen how his back stiffened in pain after climbing stairs and how certain loud noises made his hands twitch. Yet he never complained, never made excuses, never asked for more than a black coffee and time to sit on the porch. So when Naomi received the news that Eli had been invited to speak at the National Veterans Symposium in Washington, D.C., a prestigious televised event recognizing American hero, as she knew what she had to do. The organizers offered to cover Coach airfare and hotel, but Naomi refused. "Not after everything he's done," she whispered to herself late that night, eyes red from grading essays. For the next 3 months, she scrimped and save-cut out streaming services, skipped dinners out, and even picked up a few tutoring gigs on the side. Eventually, with a mix of frequent flyer miles, her own savings, and a lot of persistence, she booked him Seat 1C First Class, Horizon Skies Airlines, non-stop to D.C. She presented the ticket to Eli 2 weeks before the trip, folded neatly in a blue envelope tied with string. When he opened it and saw the airline itinerary, his brows lifted. "First class?" he asked, his voice as low and gravelly as ever. Naomi grinned. "You've spent your whole life giving. Let someone else give back for once." He tried to argue, but she silenced him with a look only a granddaughter could master. "You deserve to arrive in comfort, not squeezed between strangers in 33F. He chuckled, gently shaking his head. "You always were stubborn." She tucked a veteran priority assistance card into his wallet and made him promise to use it. "If anything goes wrong, Gavin, a little thing." Eli arrived at the airport early, just as she knew he would. Wearing his best slacks, a clean button-up, and the brown leather jacket he'd had since '79, he moved with a deliberate pace. The lines didn't bother him. Neither did the crowds. He'd been in places far more chaotic. When he reached the gate 47, he looked at his boarding pass again, nodding to himself. 1C. He sat near the windows, watching planes taxi on the runway, letting the sunlight warm his face. It wasn't just a flight, it was a moment. A chance to feel, even for a short time, that the country he served hadn't forgotten him. That someone saw him not as an old man with stiff joints, but as the soldier who had once crawled through burning jungle to pull a bleeding comrade to safety. But that sense of peace would not last. Just as pre-boarding was called, a young gate agent with too bright lipstick and a company tablet approached him. Her name tag read, Monica. "Mr. Winters, there's been a slight change with your seating." Eli blinked. "A change?" She handed him a new boarding pass. "Due to an aircraft swap, we've had to reassign some passengers. You're now in 33E. Her tone was crisp, dismissive. Eli looked down at the flimsy paper. From first class to last row, middle seat. He looked up, calm but confused. "There must be a mistake. My ticket was confirmed months ago." Monica offered a well-rehearsed smile. It's just policy, sir. He nodded slowly. I see. But what Monica didn't see, what no one at that gate saw, was that they had just set off a chain of events that would shake the entire airline to its core. Eli stood still for a long moment, holding the new boarding pass like it was something fragile, something unreal. The number 33E glared up at him middle seat, last row of economy. The kind of seat people grumbled about, the one near the lavatory with a broken recline. For a man with chronic back pain and old combat injuries, it was more than uncomfortable. It was disrespectful. But Eli didn't protest. He gave Monica a slight nod, the same kind he'd given to lieutenants who delivered bad news in far worse places. He stepped away from the gate desk, found a quiet corner by the window, and sat down heavily. Around him, the airport bustled as usual. Children whined. Announcements crackled overhead. Business travelers barked into phones. No one noticed the old man in the worn jacket, the one who'd fought for the freedom they all moved through without a second thought. He sat with his back straight and his ticket limp in his hand, staring out at the tarmac where his flight waited. Flight 1467, Horizon Skies Airlines, bound for Washington, D.C. Monica, meanwhile, turned her attention back to other passengers. She'd already forgotten his name. To her, he was just another booking number reassigned due to an equipment change. That's what the system called ETA cold technicality that allowed the airline to reshuffle seats without apology. The new aircraft had fewer first-class seats, and when revenue-paying platinum-tier members showed up late, they were given priority over mileage-based bookings. Eli had been quietly pushed a side sacrifice to the algorithm. Nearby, a teenage boy named Jordan sat with his mother, fiddling with a tablet. He glanced up and noticed Eli sitting alone, his eyes fixed somewhere far away. Something about the old man looked off. Not sad exactly, more like disappointed in a way that was too deep for tears. Then Jordan spotted the worn patch on Eli's carry-on baga, faded Ranger insignia, just barely visible beneath the canvas stitching. His father had one just like it. Jordan leaned over and texted his dad, Captain Reuben Carter, a commercial pilot who happened to be prepping for a flight at a nearby gate. The message was simple. Hey, Dad, there's an old Ranger vet at gate 47. Looks like they bumped him from first class. He's got that look, you know the one. Reuben responded almost instantly. What's his name? Jordan didn't know, but he said he'd try to find out. While Jordan discreetly observed, Eli reached into his wallet and pulled out a small laminated card. Naomi had tucked it there the day she gave him the ticket. It read, Veteran Priority Assistance, Horizon Skies Airlines. Direct access line, 800-775, Hero. He'd nearly thrown it away, assumed it was just more PR fluff. But something about Monica's indifference had cut deeper than he expected. Not because he needed luxury. He'd spent years sleeping on mud and steel. But because he knew how fragile dignity could be and how quickly it could be taken from those who'd earned it. With a sigh, Eli punched the number into his phone. It rang twice. He expected an automated system, maybe a 20-minute hold. Instead, a calm, focused voice picked up immediately. Horizon Skies Veteran Assistance Desk. This is Serena. How may I help you today? Eli cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. My name is Major Elijah Winters. I was scheduled to fly first class today to Washington, D.C. for a veterans event. Gate staff reassigned me to economy, seat 33E, due to an aircraft change. There was a pause. Not the usual kind of silence, but the sound of someone already typing, already investigating. Serena's voice came back, now more alert. Major Winters, thank you for your service. Could I have your confirmation number and gate location? He gave the information. Serena's fingers moved quickly across her keyboard. Please stay right where you are, sir. This is being escalated immediately. We'll resolve this. He ended the call quietly, almost disbelieving. The word escalated meant very little in his experience. Most systems didn't escalate anything but confusion. But there was something in Serena's tone, something that sounded like respect. Exactly 8 minutes later, the mood at Gate 47 shifted. Not subtly, not quietly. Passengers turned as a flurry of sharp suits and lanyards appeared from nowhere, cutting through the terminal crowd with purpose. At the center of it was a tall man in a tailored navy blue jacket, sweat dampening his collar, his eyes locked on the gate desk. It was Darius Holt, the CEO of Horizon Skies Airlines. The temperature around the gate dropped like a sudden storm had rolled in. Eli, still seated, blinked slowly as the man he didn't know, but who somehow looked familiar, came rushing toward him with something rare in corporate Air Travella look of genuine urgency. Eli didn't stand when the CEO approached. He was too tired, too old to make dramatic gestures. Besides, years of military command had taught him one truth. The people who rush toward you with urgency usually weren't the ones you needed to impress. Darius Holt halted 2 steps in front of him, flanked by 2 senior executives, a flight manager and a breathless assistant still muttering into a headset. Major Winters? Darius asked, voice tense but respectful. Eli gave a slight nod, slowly rising to his feet. His back straightened not, out of pride, but out of habit. I'm Darius Holt, President and CEO of Horizon Skies, he said quickly. I've just been briefed on your situation, and I want to begin by saying I'm sorry. Deeply and completely sorry. This never should have happened. Passengers nearby began turning their heads. Gate 47. Just moments ago, a sea of scrolling phones and bored yawns, now buzzed with whispers. A camera phone or two came up. Brenda, the gate supervisor who had watched this unfold from behind the desk, looked like someone had poured ice water down her spine. Eli said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence alone made the moment heavier. Darius took a breath. Sir, when I wore the uniform, I served under commanders who taught me the meaning of integrity. One of them was you. That made Eli blink. I was a junior intelligence officer in Kandahar. Your leadership back then had left a mark. Eli studied the man more closely. He hadn't recognized him at first 2 decades, and a corporate suit will do that to a person. But now he saw it. The same sharp eyes, the same clenched jaw. He gave a slow nod. Lieutenant Holt, he said softly. Darius looked like he'd been punched in the chest. You remember. I remember all my men, Eli replied. Then he added, but this isn't about memory. It's about principle. Darius didn't flinch. You're absolutely right. That's why this situation is unacceptable. You booked a confirmed first-class seat months ago. You were traveling on a personal mission of honor to speak at a national symposium, and instead, you were reassigned without consideration, empathy, or respect. He turned briefly toward the 2 executives behind him. Find the best seat on this aircraft. If there isn't one, make one. I don't care what it takes. And I want to know who allowed this decision to happen and how our veteran assistance protocol failed. One executive nodded and moved off, already tapping furiously on a tablet. Eli shifted slightly, adjusting the strap of his travel bag on his shoulder. His voice was low, but firm. I'm not here for a fuss. My granddaughter used her savings to make sure I could travel comfortably. I didn't ask for favors, just fairness. And that's exactly why we failed you so badly, Darius said. Because we allowed an algorithm to outweigh decency. You deserved better, Major. Not because of medals or status, but because of humanity. Eli's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered acknowledgement, perhaps, or restrained gratitude. You're doing right by it now, he murmured. At that moment, a senior attendant approached from the jet bridge. Seat 1A is available, Mr. Holt. The passenger has volunteered to switch flights. Make sure that passenger is compensated at triple value and rebooked with priority boarding. Holt instructed. Then he turned to Eli. Sir, may I escort you personally? Eli glanced at the line of passengers now staring openly. He adjusted his jacket and gave a faint smile. Only if you promise not to salute. Darius chuckled, tension finally cracking. Understood. As they walked slowly toward the gate, whispers followed. Phones filmed discreetly. Brenda, the gate agent who had coldly handed Eli his downgrade, stood rigid behind the counter. Darius paused as he passed her. You and I, he said sharply, will discuss the meaning of protocol, discretion, and common sense after takeoff. Brenda's face paled. She nodded once but said nothing. Eli stepped onto the jet bridge, the final boarding passenger. Not because he was late, but because someone had finally realized what it meant to put honor before policy. And while the flight would last just a few hours, the ripple effect of that silent humiliation and the dignity with which it was faced would reshape an entire company's values before the wheels even left the ground. It wasn't until Eli was comfortably seated in 1A, his bag stored, his coat folded neatly by the crew, that the true weight of what had just occurred began to settle not just for him, but for the entire airline. As he sank into the wide leather seat, his back grateful for the support, he quietly exhaled. Around him, the first-class cabin, which had moments ago hummed with idle chatter and clicking champagne flutes, had fallen almost reverently still. Something unspoken moved through the air-like passengers knew instinctively they were in the presence of someone who had endured more than they could imagine. But what no one else on board knew, what even Darius Holt hadn't fully realized, was how close the airline had come to a public catastrophe. Because if that phone call hadn't been made, if that veteran assistance card Naomi had tucked into his wallet had stayed buried under receipts and worn-down notes, none of this would have happened. Eli would have sat in that narrow economy seat, swallowed his discomfort, and quietly absorbed yet another insult from a world too busy to see him. The call was a breaking point, not just for Eli, but for the entire system that had failed to respect the very ideals it claimed to honor. Back at the main terminal, the effects of that call were still unfolding, like a chain reaction of moral reckoning. Inside the Horizon Skies Operations Center, nicknamed The Bridge by Staffer Red Alert, had been issued not through alarms, but through silence. Serena Clark, the new veteran liaison, had pulled rank she technically didn't have. She had flagged Eli's case and overrode multiple automated systems, using emergency escalation protocols she was told she'd likely never need. Her voice on the line with executive dispatch had been calm, but firm. We have a decorated Silver Star veteran Major Elijah Wintershoes just been downgraded to the worst seat on the plane. He's en route to a nationally televised veterans symposium. This isn't a complaint. It's a failure. A silence followed. Then a whisper. Winters? Not the Elijah Winters? Serena didn't blink. The very one. Within minutes, the call had reached the personal phone of CEO Holt, just as he was stepping into a routine press briefing across the terminal. What was meant to be a short Q&A about Horizon Sky's new lounge expansion never happened. Instead, Holt excused himself mid-sentence, his face paling as he read the flagged briefing on his device. He knew that name. Not from PR memos, not from company reports, but from memory, from war. Back at Gate 47, passengers began to notice something was wrong. A delay with no explanation, a gate supervisor whispering into a headset, a flight manager pacing. Monica, the young gate agent who had reassigned Eli, sat back down behind the podium, confused but defensive, unaware that the gears of accountability were grinding in her direction at full speed. Then the moment broke. Darius Holt and his executive team arrived, not like a parade but like a response team. Urgent, direct, silent with fury. When the CEO strode to the podium, he didn't speak to Monica. He looked straight through Herto, the veteran by the window who had refused to make a scene. Passengers began filming. People started whispering names, pulling up headlines. Is that the guy who dragged 3 soldiers out of an ambush in Nam? I think he's the one who testified before Congress on POW abuse. By the time Eli was being personally escorted onto the plane, social media was already ablaze. Number honor seat began trending. One video of Holt bowing his head while speaking to Eli hit 10,000 shares in the first hour. Another showed Monica being quietly led away by a supervisor, her face white, her expression crumbling under the weight of her choices. Inside the aircraft, flight attendants stood taller, passengers quieted, and one man in business class voluntarily surrendered his seat without being asked, saying simply, "He's earned more than I ever will." And as the cabin door sealed shut, as the plane pushed back from the gate, something unusual happened. The passengers applauded, not for takeoff, but for him. Eli looked out the window, eyes misting not from sadness, but from something far rarer, recognition. One call, one card, one granddaughter who thought to write down a number. It had broken a silence that had lasted too long, not just around Eli, but around every forgotten soldier shuffled to the back of the plane in a world that owed them far more than cramped seats and forced apologies. And that call, simple and small as it was, had pulled a billion-dollar airline back into alignment with its conscience. By the time Flight 1467 touched down at Reagan National Airport, the ripple effects of what had happened at Gate 47 were being felt far beyond the terminal walls. Horizon Skies Airlines, once known more for its glossy ads than genuine values, had been forced into the spotlight not by scandal, but by a reckoning rooted in respect, or more precisely, its absence. The footage of CEO Darius Holt kneeling beside Major Elijah Winters had gone viral. Not choreographed, not corporate. Just raw and powerful man, acknowledging, before the eyes of millions, that his company had failed someone who should have been protected by more than just a laminated card. The fallout came swiftly and deliberately. The next morning, a company-wide memo was issued under Holt's direct signature. It was short, sharp, and unmistakably personal. Effective immediately, Horizon Skies is launching the Winters Clausula, binding internal policy requiring priority, honor, and accommodations for decorated veterans and medal recipients traveling for military or ceremonial duty. No service member will ever be reassigned without executive oversight. If a seat must be surrendered, it will not be theirs. The memo continued, "We cannot undo our mistakes, but we can honor the men and women who wore the uniform with the same courage and clarity they once gave us. If our business model cannot accommodate dignity, then our business model must change." It wasn't just PR spin. Holt meant every word. By noon that same day, Monica, the gate agent who had so coldly reassigned Eli without lifting her eyes from the screen, was called into a disciplinary review with senior HR and the director of customer relations. She argued at first claimed she had followed procedure, that the system made the call, not her. But it wasn't about the procedure anymore. It was about her choices. The recording from the terminal captured it all. Her robotic tone, the dismissiveness in her body language, the way she ignored Eli's soft-spoken concern about back pain and his confirmed ticket. There was no curse, no confrontation, no scene, just the slow, suffocating humiliation of being unseen. By the end of the week, Monica was formally removed from customer-facing duty and reassigned to a logistics support role in the airline's data management department. Until you learn how to see people, not just passengers, her supervisor said. It wasn't meant to be cruel, it was meant to be transformative. Mark, the junior gate agent who had remained silent but visibly uncomfortable, came forward on his own accord the next day. He requested to speak with HR, submitted a written report detailing his concerns over how Eli was treated, and asked to be included in future sensitivity training programs. He wasn't punished. In fact, he was quietly promoted, placed in a mentorship program for future management. Darius Holt himself sent him a handwritten note. Doing the right thing later is better than never doing it at all. Next time, speak sooner. But you did speak. That counts. Meanwhile, Eli himself had arrived in Washington and was met with far more ceremony than he'd expected. He was escorted from the jetway by 2 uniformed Army personnel and a congressional aide, who had seen the viral clip and alerted event organizers. They wanted him to sit not just in the audience, but on the stage as one of the keynote speakers at the National Veterans Symposium. His speech was short and unscripted. "Service," he said, "doesn't stop when the war ends, and neither should the respect." He didn't mention the airline, didn't need to. Everyone already knew. But what struck the audience most was not his decorated jacket or his steely voice, it was his gentle gratitude. He thanked the teenage boy at the gate, thanked his granddaughter, Naomi, thanked the people who, when the system failed, still had the courage to correct it. In the days that followed, other airlines took notice. Military forums buzzed with stories of quiet heroes now remembered, and a few major carriers reached out to Horizon Skies for help implementing similar programs. What had started as a moment of failure had become a blueprint for redemption. Eli never saw himself as a symbol. He hated the attention, shied away from cameras, and still referred to himself as just a soldier who got lucky. But that flight changed more than his itinerary. It changed policies. It changed perspectives. It forced a billion-dollar industry to remember the cost of the freedom they profit from every day. And when Naomi called him, after seeing the news reports, worried he had gone through something traumatic, he only chuckled gently. "Nothing I couldn't handle, sweetheart," he said. "Just had to remind a few folks what real honor looks like." The ceremony at the National Veterans Symposium ended with a standing ovation. Not for any single speaker, not even for the dignitaries or generals who took the stage, but for a man who had quietly endured his flight, his shame, and his pain with the kind of grace that no uniform could teach. Major Elijah Winters. He didn't linger at the event. After shaking hands, offering humble thank yous, and posing for a few photos at the insistence of fellow veterans, Eli stepped outside into the cool DC air and took a quiet breath. He didn't bask in the attention. He never had. But something was different this time. Something shifted in how people looked at him, not just as a veteran, but as a man whose presence had moved an entire system to change course. The limousine Horizon Skies had arranged was waiting to take him to the hotel they upgraded at the last minute. But Eli asked the driver to make a stop, First Arlington National Cemetery. No fanfare, no press. Just one man, walking slowly among headstones that held names he would never forget. He paused at 3 in particular. One belonged to a soldier he had carried out of a burning village with a shattered spine. The second, a young man who had taken shrapnel meant for Eli. And the third, his son. Eli stood there in silence for a long time. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the original 1C boarding pass Naomi had printed at home, the one they had thought was discarded. He placed it gently at the base of the gravestone, like an offering. "You made it count," he whispered. "You always did." The next morning, Naomi called. She had seen the news, the videos, the social media storm, the headlines. Airline: CEO reverses veterans' humiliation mid-flight. A war hero and a middle seat. The moment that shamed an industry. The Winters Clause: why airlines are finally paying attention. Her voice trembled when she picked up. "Grandpa," she asked, "why didn't you tell me what happened?" Eli smiled gently through the phone. "Because it didn't need to ruin your gift. You gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. The seat didn't matter, Naomi. The world's response did. Your card saved a lot more than my back." She was quiet, then whispered, "I just wanted them to treat you right." "They did," he said, "eventually, but only because you believed I deserved it first." That simple truth struck Naomi deeper than any headline. In the weeks that followed, Eli received letters. Not emails. Letters. From soldiers. From teachers. From airport staff. From other veterans who had once sat in row 33 and said nothing. They wrote of how his calm resistance had given them courage. Some asked for advice. Others simply said thank you. He responded to everyone in his neat, angular handwriting. And then a package arrived from Horizon Skies. Inside was a black leather card case engraved with silver initials. EW inside was a lifetime premier card with no expiration date and a note. "Major Winters, your seat wherever you go is no longer subject to availability. Thank you for showing us what honor really looks like. Darius Holt." Eli never used the card for luxury. He donated most of his travel perks to a new foundation Naomi helped him set up, the Quiet Valor Fund, which provided upgraded travel, therapy access, and personal support for aging veterans flying to VA appointments or memorial events. The first thing they did? Print 10,000 veteran assistance cards modeled after the one Naomi had tucked into his wallet with an emergency line that actually worked. As for Holt, the CEO never forgot the lesson. He mentioned Eli in speeches, at board meetings, even in hiring briefings for new recruits. "Find the one as in your crowd," he would say, "because some of them once crawled through hell to earn that seat." Eli's story was retold, not for pity, but for principle. For the world to understand that respect isn't a perk, it's a promise. That dignity must never be a reward, it must be the starting point. And on quiet evenings back in Fairbridge, when the porch light was low and the wind was soft, Eli would sit in the same wooden chair he'd always favored, sipping black coffee, gazing out at the trees. Sometimes Naomi would join him, and every once in a while, just as the sun dipped low, she'd lean her head on his shoulder and whisper, "33E?" And he'd chuckle softly. "No, sweetheart," he'd reply. "1A always." In the months that followed, the story of Major Elijah Winters faded from the headlines, but its impact never did. Somewhere between viral footage and quiet policymaking, his journey became more than just a feel-good story. It became a standard. Not a moment frozen in time, but a living reminder that dignity should never be accidental, and respect should never be conditional. Airlines across the country, and eventually around the world, began reevaluating their veteran treatment protocols. Some issued press releases. Others, silently and sincerely, changed their internal guidelines. It wasn't about optics anymore. It was about conscience. A single reassigned seat had pierced through the numbing noise of corporate excuses and reminded decision-makers that a middle seat might fit a ticket, but it doesn't fit a legacy. The Winters Clause, adopted not only by Horizon Skies, but eventually by 4 other major carriers, became a symbol of change, crafted not by outrage but by restraint, by the powerful, dignified silence of a man who had every right to shout but chose instead to act. His quiet presence in 1A, seated with calm and patience, had spoken louder than any protest ever could. At Horizon Skies headquarters, the story was immortalized in a framed display outside the executive conference room. It featured a photograph of Eli gazing out the plane window, a copy of the boarding pass labeled 33E Void, and a small brass plaque beneath that read, "This seat is permanently reassigned to honor." When a new hire at the airline asked who Eli Winters was, senior staff wouldn't just say, "a war hero." They'd tell the whole story, the mistake, the recovery, the ripple effect. Because true legacy isn't born in medals or articles. It's born in the uncomfortable moments where values are tested and reclaimed. As for Eli himself, he never saw that display. He didn't want to. "Let the story belong to the next soldier," he told Naomi when she offered to show him a photo of it. "I've had my seat. Let someone else sit in it now." Naomi eventually became the co-director of the Quiet Valor Fund. It grew faster than either of them expected. Veterans wrote in daily with stories, some heartbreaking, some inspiring. With each boarding pass upgraded, each flight made easier, she saw her grandfather's shadow in the quiet corners of every terminal. Years later, when Eli passed peacefully in his sleep, the airline paid tribute not with a press release, but with an action. On the day of his funeral, Seat 1A on every Horizon Skies flight remained empty, draped with an American flag and a single white rose. The pilots made a brief announcement before takeoff. "Today, we leave this seat open in memory of Major Elijah Winters, a man who reminded us all that respect is never an upgrade, it's a right." Passengers wept, some stood, and thousands of people who never met him knew, in that moment, that something larger than aviation had taken flight. In Fairbridge, his funeral was modest, just as he would have wanted. No motorcade, no military flyover. Just old friends, family, and former soldiers gathering at the town chapel, where the American flag was folded and passed into Naomi's hands. As she accepted it, she whispered, "You're still flying first class, Grandpa, even now." That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a single contrail crossed the evening sky, catching the golden light just right. Naomi looked up from the porch, tears in her eyes, heart full, and she realized that her grandfather had never just changed where he sat, had changed how people saw the seat itself, not as a measure of wealth, not as a perk of privilege, but as a symbol of what's possible when honor is finally placed where it belongs. From then on, every time someone boarded a flight and glanced toward 1A, they'd think twice. Maybe they'd offer it to someone older. Maybe they'd treat a stranger with more patience. Maybe they'd ask a quiet man about the patch on his bag. Maybe, just maybe, a seat could change the sky.